So I am going to kick things off here by simply saying hello. I hope everyone is doing well. I know that, as is evidenced by many posts, and of course the fantastic performances that the center of my screen, Laura Blackerby, is currently putting on with her. Are you doing the 3-way or the 4-way, Laura? You're muted. Hold on.
The 3-way with extra cheese.
Well, I just was enjoying looking at your paces, and I was talking about you to some other people today, not in Cincinnati, and I was describing your paces, and I still can't figure it out. I don't get it. Good for you. It's awesome to watch.
Thank you.
Enjoy. It looks like you're actually enjoying it, which is kind of nice to see. So,
yes, I'm having fun.
Good. So, with this would be obviously the traditional pig week for all of us, and I know for many of us it's kind of sad. I am certainly one of those people that are in the sad department, but I also am sort of I don't know, maybe the word is hopeful. I don't know if that's the right word, but I kind of like, it is super sad because for 21 years. The first Sunday in May, I run 26 miles. I promise you I will not be doing that this Sunday. There's no way in hell I can run 26 miles. But I'm gonna try to get in 26 miles over the weekend if I can do it. I think we can hopefully put a little shine on this week, even if it's not exactly what we would have all hoped or expected. So. We'll continue to do some fun things online, and we'll celebrate a bit of the season on Monday, a week from, 6 days away from today, a week from yesterday, and then we'll pick some things back up. So tonight's chat is kind of a follow-up to our part 1 a couple weeks ago of micronutrients and kind of how nutrition and fueling relates to training, performance, and many other things, but primarily training and performance. And you all are lucky enough to witness me bowing out for most of the rest of the evening as my wife takes over. You will enjoy many beautiful slides. I'm sure wonderful citations that you can all look up the bibliography later. Can I call it a bibliography when it's not like a book? Citations, right? Okay. I still kind of calling it a bibliography. We're excited. Thank you, Kelly. Beautiful. As we roll on through this, though, if you have any questions at all, you can either hold them till the end. You can put them in the chat that is now open on the side of the screen, or you can appropriately interrupt if you feel that's necessary. Completely fine if you do. It's not seen as an interruption. So, but I will let Laura take over now. And if I suddenly turn to robotic voice, which I already had that trouble on one conference call today, I will of course go over to Laura's computer. I don't know why that keeps happening on my computer, but hopefully not. And in the meantime, I introduce my lovely, my talented, and my super freaking nerdy wife, Laura Lucan. The floor is yours. Hold on.
You got him.
I'm grabbing my drink.
Okay, now I can actually talk without. Nope, still not muted, Rick. Rick.
I know. Jesus.
The echoing. Okay. Maybe I can make this work. There you go. Okay. So we talked last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, about some micronutrient stuff. And so I thought maybe we could discuss really kind of a fast and dirty overview of some of the research that would be relevant to your training for macronutrients, which would be, like fats, proteins, carbohydrates. And we're not gonna do much more more than that. And so when I was putting this together, I was trying to figure out, there's a lot that you can kind of go into a large black hole. So I was trying to think of some of the different goals that we all would have with our training. And so first of all, maintaining your energy supply to work, keep your muscles working, but also your other tissues. And so you would want to do that while promoting, positive adaptations, right? So lean muscle, increase muscle mass, repair of muscles when you're doing your workouts, promoting immunity, resilience, resistance to infection. We've talked a lot about that over the last 6 weeks, right? And then also, like, when we're practicing for the race, like, what are we going to eat race day, right? We have to practice that during our training runs. And so I was kind of keeping those key points in mind. So a little bit of background, I think, is required if we're going to actually have this conversation. So historically, nutrition research focused on performance. So how do you eat and fuel for performance, to recover so you can perform again, to recover from competition, to prepare for competition. And it also had a significant research bias. The majority of studies through basically the early 90s focused on young white males. And no, that's not you. No, not anymore. So about half of us, at least, probably more, don't fall into that category. And so it's not appropriate, especially for females also, who cycle and who have different body compositions. It's not appropriate. So when you're looking at a lot of the historical literature or a lot of the kind of go-to standards on nutrition, it's always good to keep those in mind. We're not going to get too far down that. If there's interest in, differences in that, I did a lot of my PhD research in that. We can talk about that maybe at a later date. But recently, since the early 90s, there has been a shift to explore more of the role of macronutrients, and specifically the trend is promoting skeletal muscle adaptations during endurance training, because you ultimately see the payoff. So instead of how do you perform in competition as the focus, it is how do you increase positive adaptations in training that then would result in a good performance. And those are kind of two different questions. So just to, if you didn't play this game 2 weeks ago, if we wanted to take a look at our evidence-based scale, so everything that I'm going to tell you, if you see a nice green little square next to it, it means there's a lot of studies that actually support this, and you can pretty much say, this looks like it's a good idea. It looks like it has evidence behind it. Yellow, maybe either it has conflicting evidence. Some studies say yes, some studies say no, or it's an emerging concept. So there's just not enough evidence out there yet, TBD, right? Or if we have red, that's going to be our bullshit meter, as in there's no studies that support this. There's like only one study that supports this, or perhaps it might have been something that was supported previously, but it has been overturned. So let's start with carbs, right? We all love carbs. And as runners, we kind of have this idea of this love affair with carbs, right? The more carbs, the better. It helps your training. Exactly. We all like carbs because carbs taste delicious, right? And our modern understanding of carbohydrate metabolism, so I thought that maybe I did earlier, but CHO stands for carbohydrate. Actually, basically everything that we kind of hold as true was kind of put out by a bunch of Scandinavians in the late 60s. And they did it by looking at different muscles and taking different glycogen stores with muscles. And we know that our entire body actually only our storage capacity for glycogen, which is our carbohydrates, right? It's only about 500 grams, which isn't that much. So that's kind of surprising. It's stored mostly in our muscles or in our livers. There is a small amount that is in our bloodstream as glucose. And so that's why we have to keep taking glucose in or carbohydrates in to replenish that. Exercise depletes those glycogen stores, and the intensity actually matters. So the more intense the workout, the more the depletion of the stores. Makes sense. So traditionally, high carbohydrate diets were used because we were trying to increase muscle glycogen stores. We'll talk about a little bit about this in a second, but your muscles can actually work as a sponge for glycogen, right? It actually has the ability to get more in the tank if you deplete it. So, which is what this last statement kind of alludes to. Muscle glycogen storage is acutely enhanced following prior glycogen depletion. So what this means is if you actually take all of the glycogen and you deplete it out of your muscles, and then you eat a bunch of carbohydrates, your muscle will act like a sponge and actually absorb more. So if any of you have ever heard about me talking about the crazy Russians that I used to run with, they used to, and we affectionately call this as the Russian pre-race diet. So they would have all of their athletes, which I was one of them, had followed this really, really high protein, low carbohydrate, low salt diet for the first part of the week leading up to a race, and then just like sugar bomb you the last couple of days of the race, and your muscles would just go. And it actually, I mean, from anecdotally, I seem to work pretty well because your muscles can kind of work like a sponge. So the take-home message here is you can actually fill up your muscles with glycogen, which is why carbohydrates are so great. Recent studies, so none of that's wrong. That's all true, but the recent studies are kind of like the next step in the story. So yes, and it is important for maintaining your energy levels, but actually just habitual high carbohydrate diets are really not supported that much anymore. Instead, there's a shift toward this idea of eating different quantities or different amounts of carbohydrates depending on where you are in your training or what type of workout you are doing, or what part of your training. Are you at the beginning in your base days, or are you at the end? Are you tapering? And so there's a little bit more customization to it, and we'll look at a little bit of that in a minute. Okay. So glycogen is basically, we have also learned, more than just an energy source. It's more than just keeping your muscles moving. It actually regulates a bunch of really important pathways. So one of the most important one is called carbohydrate oxidation. All that means is breaking the chains of carbohydrates. So it's in a usable energy form. So you put a carbohydrate in, you can't just use it, you have to break it apart, and it takes energy. That's called oxidation. And it actually is very important in that. Insulin sensitivity, muscle contractibility, so the actual contraction of your muscle, the power behind that. If you talk about power, and you fast twitch and slow twitch muscles, carbohydrates actually play a role, and the timing of that as well in glycogen. Protein degradation, and then the autophagic process, which is just breaking down of muscles, right? Breaking down of the muscle tissues. So this is really funny. So I wanted to find a picture. I wanted to find a picture of something that kind of showed, simply showed, and this is not that picture, well, because I never found it, simply show the process of oxidation, carbohydrate oxidation as an example, right? And so a bunch of these images with this guy shows up, and apparently he has this whole YouTube series on explaining, kind of chemistry and biochemistry concepts, right? And I'm looking at him and I'm just like, oh my God, I know him. that was my high school boyfriend. I loved him. His name's Tyler DeWitt, and he has this whole thing. And so Rick knows this. So Rick decided that I had to show this picture, the before and after of, yeah, Tyler, Rick. Tyler, Rick. Yeah. Okay.
We have to ask them which one they would choose.
Oh, yeah, you can vote in the chat box.
Yeah, please vote in the chat.
Okay. All right, moving on. So how do we use carbs in our training? So this is more for your reference kind of later on, but we'll take a look at this. So I like this chart, and I took this from a pretty recent kind of review article that is cited here and then also in the citations at the end. But it's helpful because it breaks stuff down as in like, how much do you eat daily? How many carbs do you eat daily? How much do you eat leading up to your exercise event, right? Your workout, during your exercise event, and then after, right? So basically on a daily dose, this is kind of like, it looks like per kilogram, it does everything in kilograms, right? If you exercise lightly, moderately, very high, I'm less concerned with this one. What I think is interesting is the pre, during, and post exercise kind of area of this chart. So for pre-exercise, it says that, you need basically about 1 to 4 grams per kilogram about an hour to 4 hours before exercise. And you should choose things that are high in fat and protein, choices high in fat and protein should be avoided to avoid gastrointestinal issues. So like no French fries. Makes sense, right? We've all, well, maybe not all of us, but have had Taco Bell and then went and run and had it and poorly. But so there is evidence for that. I mean, we all have experienced something like that. But there isn't any evidence of another kind of trend that has been out there that looks at glycemic load or the glycemic index, so the type of carbohydrate. And if you look down on the right-hand side, you can see different examples of food along the continuum of the glycemic index, right? So high glycemic load foods would be like Matt Beck diet, candy, cookies, popcorn, right? Medium glycemic index foods would be like pastas and bread. And low glycemic index foods would be like fruits and vegetables and stuff like that. So there doesn't seem to be a lot of evidence. I've seen a couple of citations that say maybe the lower glycemic index foods result in a more positive outcome as far as endurance goes, but most of them are probably related to like gastrointestinal distress rather than like the ability to fuel muscles. During exercise, there was.
Leslie, she just grabbed Taco Bell.
Huh?
Leslie just got up, left, right.
Wait, I got Taco Bell. She got Taco Bell.
I think Leslie got Taco Bell.
So, then there's the during exercise kind of need for carbohydrate, right? When you are supplementing. So, basically, if you are any activity over an hour, the recommendation is about 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrate. So if you look at a normal gel, it's about 60 grams of carbohydrates in a gel, and that's pretty normal. And then post-exercise, there's actually a pretty, this is on the glycemic index as well, but there is a lot of evidence for this, that you should eat something in the high glycemic index, right? So if you're wanting your Frosty and your fries after that, within 30 minutes after exercise, right? So you want something that has something in the medium to high glycemic load. There are some different diets and approaches to training and how to use carbohydrates to enhance your fitness or your condition. There's the kind of general carbohydrate feeding during exercise. That's that concept in the previous table of you're eating about 60 grams of carbohydrates every hour. That's why we put gels out in our long runs. That's why we have Gatorade. people fuel during races. So that is a pretty standard and well accepted, idea. There's also this idea of periodization, where muscles and the rate in which they use carbohydrates is affected by the intensity and the duration, and even the training status. Are you in the beginning of your training in the base phase, or toward the end? And that the way you use carbohydrates really should be dependent on your workout intensity and length, right? So the longer the workout, and the higher the intensity, you'll use those carbohydrates different. So there's two different ideas, and actually we talked a little bit about fasted training on the Zoom call last week. But there's another one, there's two versions of this, and there's actually evidence to support both of them. One has a little bit more research in it than the other. And one of them I actually have very little experience with from a use perspective in my own training, but they're interesting. So the first one is train low, race high. I'm sure some of you have heard of it. And the other one, which you may not have heard of, is called train high, sleep low. And this has been gaining traction in kind of more recent years, since about 2017-ish. And it's interesting. So the idea between fasted training or train low, race high is that in the majority of your easy runs, and even some of your long runs, you do fasted training. So you go to bed, you wake up, and you don't really have anything to eat, and you have water. You do fasted training for some of your high intensity workouts, but you race high, so you're actually using every hour that 60 grams at least of carbohydrates during your competition, and then leading up to your competition, you do what's called glycogen loading, that concept of your carbo loading, right? The traditional pasta. Train high, sleep low is another idea where the high carbohydrate diet is consumed prior to, in most of the studies, it's an evening high intensity workout session. So if you imagine our Tuesday night workouts, right? So before that, that all day leading up to that, you would carbo load for your workout on Tuesday evening. Then after your Tuesday evening workout, you would go to bed, but you would not take in that post-workout carbohydrate. So as we move toward the right-hand side of the screen on that chart that suggested that you needed that high glycemic carbohydrate within 30 minutes of your workout, you wouldn't do that. So you would basically do fasting sleep. Then you would wake up the next morning and do a fasted low intensity workout so like an easy run. But again, you haven't eaten anything yet. The research on this has shown improvements in time trial performances for running, and basically 10K running performance. I haven't really seen a lot done in the marathon yet with this, but it's an interesting concept. Okay, so another question that tends to circulate is, does the form of the carbohydrate matter? Does it matter if I'm taking gels? Does it matter if I'm taking liquid, or if I'm taking a bar? And there's actually some pretty interesting stuff that's come out about this, and I'll kind of walk you through these two graphics because I think they are they make sense. Like after I looked at all of this, I kind of went, yeah, well that's duh. But there's still interesting evidence anyway. Basically, the worst possible thing you should probably eat is a bar for taking in carbohydrates. So you'll see that over here. Can you see my mouse when I'm doing this? Rick? No. Okay.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay. So this medium gray box here is the bar, and it was shown that it has for power. So this is looking at power. So as you push off the ground, right, which is ultimately going to have a correlation with your efficiency, how much power. Consumption of carbohydrates in a bar form actually led to the least amount of power. The best performer was, if you look in the black here, the gel. There wasn't necessarily a difference with a significant difference, at least with the drink, but you can see here. So the top of the bar had the most power. But what's really kind of interesting, at least in my I'm trying to move all of your faces off of my screen. Okay, there we go. Is this graphic over here that looks at different things that we all experience, right? Stomach fullness, nausea, perceived exertion, abdominal cramping, and muscle tiredness. And the bar is the little triangle. And if you look at this, on every single one of them, right, it actually has more of a negative effect, right? Your stomach feels fuller. You experience more nausea, more abdominal cramping, more muscle fatigue, and you perceive that you are exerting yourself more. So your body actually is able to use, what that means is your body is not able to utilize those carbohydrates in the same way. And pretty much across the board, with the exception of maybe some mixing in right here, right, you can see that the gel performs pretty well on all of those. So the drink does pretty well with the abdominal cramping over the gel, and also if you look up here, the drink also performs pretty well with stomach fullness. But so it does seem that the form in which you intake carbohydrates matters, and I think that some of that obviously is going to be very individualized. So it depends on how sensitive you are. Fats. Okay, so the recommendation is that's kind of across the board, is that fat should not be less than 20% of your caloric intake. So regardless of what kind of diet you decide to follow, high fat, high carbohydrate, vegan, paleo, whatever, 20% of your calories that you intake on a daily basis should come from fat. There is some research, although it's kind of still emerging, that polyunsaturated fats, and I think we talked about this a little tiny bit in the first version of this talk, may improve exercise performance specifically by reducing inflammation. So your muscles will tend to swell and become inflamed after long runs or your workouts, and a diet that's higher in polyunsaturated fats may help to reduce that inflammation, which ultimately can help you to recover and adapt more quickly. Metabolic flexibility and the greater use of fat as an energy source also does have a lot of support to it. So learning to, it's that concept of ketosis and learning to actually use fats as an energy store. Yes, there's a lot of great resources on that and evidence to support that. Also, it can improve exercise performance in what are identified as ultra endurance events. And this basically is anything over 3 hours. So if you are over a 3-hour marathoner, then the ability to call upon fat as a source of energy does actually lead to increased training adaptations. If you are below a 3-hour marathoner, not a whole lot of evidence yet, but not evidence against it, just, TBD. There's a lot of different kind of diets out there. There's an idea of low carbohydrate, high fat that's pretty popular right now. Research on it says maybe increased ability to use fat with low carbohydrate diets. So that does occur. And workouts with low carbohydrate availability may maximize that fat burning adaptation. But if we go to the extreme of these, right, and we talked about this a little bit in the first talk too, so I wanted to revisit it because I didn't know a whole lot about it, so I wanted to go and read up before I made any sweeping statements. Very low carbohydrate diets, like the popular paleo or keto diets, usually lead to this concept of keratosis. And keratosis is when you have blood glucose levels that are induced with these low carbohydrate diets. And so instead of carbohydrates, the brain and the muscles actually metabolize ketones and use those as a fuel source. There's not a whole lot of evidence right now to suggest that it is an adequate fuel source, although some people swear by it. Also, there's this idea of supplementation with ketones before exercise, right? And this is basically a bunch, like if you don't want to adhere to a paleo or a keto diet because carbs are delicious, right? One way to do this is to just actually ingest or supplement with ketones. The research on this showed that there was no difference between those individuals who supplemented and those who did not. Protein. So protein is very variable as far as how it's used to enhance training. So requirements are higher for athletes depending on where they are in their training and what their goals are, right? It helps to maintain energy balance, promote muscle mass, balance out your protein, repair, recover, etc. But most importantly, it plays a role post-workout. So about 15 to 25 grams of protein after exercise, and this would be more lean proteins, actually plays a really great role in protein synthesis and therefore recovery. And it also is important in timing to trigger those adaptations. And there's been a few really interesting studies that have come out that show that consuming a specific type of protein, casein protein, about 30 to 40 grams before you go to bed can actually increase protein synthesis and actually help you sleep. So another graphic like I had before, and I think this is kind of wrapping up this, but it's that idea of daily dose, pre-exercise, during, and post again. So daily exercise, not daily exercise, daily dose. So it's looking at that casein. This is that study that I was referring to. Before you sleep, about 30 to 40 grams can increase protein synthesis, which is good. So what's your body doing when you're sleeping? You're resting. And so you are giving your body the ability to recover your muscles, to build them back up. So why not give them the building blocks to do that? This is how you can do it. Pre-exercise, so along with those 30 to 60 grams of carbohydrates, there's some evidence that suggests actually taking in some protein with this actually improves endurance and speed. I don't know if you guys remember a few years back, there was a lot of hype around a certain gel that had protein in it. I even used it for a little while. I didn't notice any difference, but that's kind of where this idea came from. During exercise, it could reduce muscle damage and soreness. There is some decent evidence for that. And then also you want to get some protein in to help with muscle regeneration about 30 minutes after exercise. And that is going to be dependent on your body weight. And so that's kind of that calculation there. Okay, so that's all I've got. It's kind of a quick and dirty run through. I can answer questions. Here's lots of citations. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
You can read, so one question was, and so I'm going to put on mute to ask you. Marie said she did the.
Why don't you come over here?
What?
Come over here.
Why?
So they can hear you.
No, I'm asking you to answer this.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Marie said she did the fasting thing and had a very bad race. So hold on. It's in the comments.
I'm looking for it.
It's actually to me privately. Sorry. She went from high performance relatively to low, train low, race high, and hit fasting. Who knew? She said she had a very bad race. She actually got the race.
All right, let me go up so I can see. Because I
You
can't see it.
it. It's to me.
Huh?
It's to me privately.
Oh.
You can't see it.
Here,
So
I can
train. So there was a question about training low and racing high. And so I think that a lot of the research, someone had a bad experience with it. So I think a lot of the research actually, one thing to keep in mind is focused oftentimes on collegiate athletes or elite athletes. And most of us do not fall into that category. And so that is something to keep in mind. Also, and most of those individuals are and the research are using very specific quantities of protein or carbohydrates. And so if you've experimented with it before, if you haven't kind of used very specific guidelines, you may have experienced variation in results, right? And so I think that kind of playing around with it may help to improve that. It also just might not work for you. I think one thing that I truly believe is there's a lot of, individual variation. And so what may work for even the majority of people may not work for you. And that's why it's really important to kind of, test things out and see what works for you and develop that over time.
So hang on, actually, hey, Rick.
Alternatives for casein?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure if there's going to be an alternative because it's literally that specific form of the protein that is beneficial. So there are different types of, there's like whey protein, but the whey protein doesn't have the same effect, for example. I know that some people have allergies to casein. So yeah, that wouldn't work for, well, it might work for you, but it's going to have negative effects in other areas. So don't eat that.
And then John said, you can see his question up here. He's like, so if it shows 10K performance improvements, does it actually show long-term improvements over an entire training season?
Okay, so John asked about if it shows 10K performance, does it show, what about long-term for other endurance races, right? So it depends, right? So that's often the limitation of some of this research, right? So endurance events, you got to remember that 5K and 10Ks actually are considered endurance events. I know that seems super crazy to us because we do half marathons and marathons, right? But if there hasn't been a whole lot of research that have been done on half marathon and marathons, part of the reason for that is going to be feasibility, right? Think about how we train. It's very difficult to create a study environment for what we do on the road because we need large space to go run. I mean, I guess you could stick people on the treadmill, but they're going to want to blow their brains out. It actually doesn't simulate a race environment, but you very easily can simulate a race environment for a 5K or a 10K because you do them on the track and you can. So that's, I think I mentioned before, historically, a lot of the endurance running research has been focused on kind of track events. And so I haven't really seen a whole lot on the 15K, but the 5K, 10K is considered the endurance. And then a lot of what will happen is those results will be extrapolated out to marathons and half marathons.
So Marie kind of followed up. You can see now it says one to everyone. So if you go a little higher up in the comments, you'll see real quickly there.
I've used plant-based protein post all my runs for the last 2 years. In fact, I would be take only my high intensity workout, great results on fast and train until I backed off.
And then had it
crashed. I see. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so I'm hardly in the elite category or anywhere close. So I actually had great results with the fasting.
Wasn't train
and
high,
the training
sleep low a song? Yes, absolutely.
All of that, but both of those, and I am far from collegiate or any of that stuff. But
else.
then I screwed it up in August and I stopped doing that.
All right. Any other questions?
To elaborate on the question, are these nutrition variations something you should be doing throughout the training season or just before race?
That's a good question. So nutrition variations, something you should be doing throughout training season or just before a race. So it depends on what you mean by variation, right? Should you be eating the same thing if we go with the BE training schedule, right, on Monday as you eat on Tuesday, as you eat on Friday, as you eat on Saturday? And the answer is no. So kind of across the board, research show that there is great benefit in this idea of what's called periodization, meaning depending on the period, right? So the timing of your week and where you are and what you're going to be doing, you should adjust your nutrition to address that. So, and what you will need and what you will benefit from, I think, is going to be a little bit individualized too. So from a carbohydrate perspective, for example, I eat more carbohydrates the morning of a long run and the night before, and then the day after that I do the long run, so Saturday all day, than I do on any other day of the week. I'll eat a lot of protein and slightly more carbohydrates on a Tuesday for a workout on Tuesday night. Then on Wednesday, at least for me, and I think Amy and I always joke, we call it the hungering. On Wednesday, we usually do our strength workouts, and it just kind of like is this effect of all of this high intensity training from the workout and then the strength, and it just kind of flushes over you and you become like super hungry and ravenous. And so I introduce more, higher proteins, like whey proteins and protein powders and stuff like that. So the answer is there's great benefit. Now that's going to be on kind of a week to week kind of microcycle, right? So like within that, if you're looking at the entire training program, you can start off, the base phase you can kind of play around with. It's a good opportunity to be a little bit lower in the carbohydrates if you want to, kind of higher in the proteins. But as you start to go up in your training, you're also going to need to layer in some more carbohydrates. I think that there's a tendency for individuals to this concept of wanting to be light, so you're not carrying around extra weight, right? But there has to be an energy balance. So there's been lots of studies that look at weight in relation to performance. And yes, while being lighter ultimately has a benefit in performance because you're not carrying around as much weight, being lighter because you're eating less actually has a negative correlation. What has the highest correlation is being lighter because you have a very high energy turnover. And so this is really, really well supported by the literature over and over and over again. High energy turnover, meaning you're burning all the stuff you're putting in, but you're putting in a lot, has really great effects for being lighter, but just not fueling yourself and then being lighter ultimately leads to things like stress fractures and fatigue and muscle tears and all sorts of bad things. I don't know if that answers your question.
Good. Any other question? Ask the question.
Other questions?
What?
Trisha said Trisha's comment about gaining the COVID-19 pounds. Where does Candy fit in? Asking for Matt?
Right, ask him if he's asking for a friend also in a green shirt.
I can handle
In a
this
green
one.
shirt? Yeah. So
And everywhere.
everything with moderation, right? So everybody knows that Matt eats just candy and cookies for everything. And he clearly has some success with that. So maybe you're a unicorn, Matt. I don't know. But on a more serious note, so the reason things like candies and cookies, and these super high glycemic index type things aren't really great is because they tend to have what's called shorter chain sugars, right? So they're glucose is a little bit longer, but fructose is fruit, and they have these like kind of shorter chain sugars. If you look at gels tend to have things like or whole grains or complete carbohydrates that we've talked about in some of our food project videos. they are longer chains. And if you think about burning, remember I talked about oxidation, right? And so you have to break those bonds in the carbohydrates to use them. Well, the more bonds there are to break, the longer that sugar will last, right? So in most of the gels, we have something called maltodextrin. It's a really long burning sugar source. And so it burns for a long time, it stays with you longer, and you don't deplete it as well. Some people's stomachs don't do as well with that. And so if you look at things like honey stingers, they use a different form of carbohydrates called dextrose, or the brown rice sugar is dextrose, I believe also. And those are shorter chain sugars or medium chain sugars. And so they don't burn as long, but sometimes they are easier to pass through the gut. And so I'm not sure if that really addresses candy, but
explain the burn, meaning that the longer it's burning, also the longer the positive effect, as you're going to like to just say.
Rick wants me to say that the longer the burn, the because they can't hear you. No, because you can't. The longer the burn of the sugar chain, that the more positive the effect. And he's right, because you're not gonna have to intake more carbohydrates and in the same amount of time.
It's just a general layperson versus.
Hmm?
It was just a layperson's interpretation versus the science side.
Matt couldn't clean up his diet for how long did you eat well for? Like a week?
It was, to be honest, it was about a month, and then it went south pretty quickly. Because
any other questions? I can turn it back over to Rick.
Be careful. Is it back to me?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing good ever came out of should I turn it back over to Rick. At least I'm guessing. My robot voice or regular voice? Am I good? Do I sound all right? Good. Okay. Just want to make sure I didn't turn into the robot, like what seems to keep happening. Thank you, John. So, hopefully this all comes together. I mean, it should, in the scheme of things, we were trying to create the two different nutrition pieces, and then actually also taking into account what I would kind of refer to as the performance piece last week with the pace and effort and everything. The idea behind some of this is just to get some of the I hate to say the science, but some of the detail behind what happens, as we train and do a lot of the different things we do. And obviously with the change in the training season, we thought this would be kind of a cool way to talk about some of the other benefits and value of things that we do when we're not together, right? And so the intent is, kind of moving forward, even with the training group and throughout this off season, is to kind of continue a lot of this stuff, and hopefully, the goal isn't to just everybody gets goes through a training season and then you do your race and then you walk away and then you come to the training season again and walk away. Ideally, we'd like people to become better educated and feel like they understand what it is we do and why we do it. And when I say we, meaning all of you too, not meaning why we do the training program the way we do, but to actually walk away with a better education about it. And whether that's about running or walking or training or performance, or, all those things, because they all come into play. There's many pieces to the puzzle, and what we try to do with our programs is make them as robust as possible. And at the same time, make you not have to put in the energy and effort to, let's say, uncover all this information on your own. So, I think that continuing things like this, I think, will be valuable. We are always open to suggestions if people have ideas about other things they would like to learn about or hear about, or maybe just a question you've had as you've gone through racing or training in the past. So, we hope that you guys get value out of these things. and you know, when you couple this with some of the physical on street, you know, on the road training, if you will, you know, we think it all plays a part, right? And then when you look at your performance on race day, which is what many of us do, I think there's also great value in just having a good training season. You know, some people say, like, I just feel good. And if you just can go out on a Wednesday evening by yourself and have a good run, for many people, that can be very rewarding, and understandably so. But you know, when we try to translate much of this to race day, it's often viewed as like all of these different aspects of training, whether it, you know, be nutrition or you know, how did my speed work go, or how do my legs feel, and you know, what were my long runs like, you know, did I get that last workout in, you know, all those things, all the stuff comes together on race day, and that perfect storm is, you know, what we kind of say is when people have their best day, right? And that perfect storm can be taken lots of other things that are also out of our control, like weather and you know, and I don't want to say whether it's not the exact same thing, but you know, heat. How did my food settle in my stomach last night? You know, that kind of thing. Many things that we don't necessarily have absolute control over, and that can affect race day just as much. So, you know, we hope this stuff adds value, and the idea here is to give you all a better education about all of the aspects of training that we can control, and that we can at least talk about, and try to get good best practices and good habits and whatnot. So that's the reason for it. Hopefully you guys get you know, see something here that benefits you. If you have, like I said, any questions or ideas for other topics, please let us know. We will get together again Thursday evening for our quote unquote last happy hour of the season, hosted by the two lovely young ladies, possibly on your screen if you're seeing them, Julie and Leslie. They're our hosts for this season. See Kelly like waving it on my screen. Kelly's waving right at Leslie, which is kind of funny. So we'll continue that Thursday evening, and then you know, the hope is that even if you are not doing the virtual races, I know many people are for the pig this weekend, you can get out and play around with some of the stuff that I put in the email, and I'll add that again to Thursday's email. I also figured out an amazing fact, at least I find this amazing. I shared it with a couple of people today. I'm not sure they found it as amazing as I did. But if you do the 26.2 kilometers rather than miles on Sunday or Saturday, whatever you choose, but you may be a person that wanted to do the 4-way or 3-way in the past. If you take the 26.2 kilometers, the 10K and 5K that would occur on Saturday for the pig, and then also instead of the mile on Friday, would do a 1K. If you take 1K, 5K, 10K, and 26.2K and add them all up, you get a lovely number of 42.2K, which equals, kind of randomly, exactly 26.2 miles. Which I know, Matt, it's amazing, but true. I actually found that kind of weird. I thought it was a really weird kind of piece of information. I was just doing math while I was running yesterday, and I'm like, this should be almost exactly 26.2 miles, and it was. So that's what I'm going to actually try to do. So I'm going to try to do the 1K Friday, and 5K, 10K on Saturday, and then 26.2 kilometers on Sunday, because again, there's no way in hell I can run 26 miles on Sunday. I'm not even going to try, because I'll probably end up in a hospital.
You have to run a full distance to get the medal for the virtual? Do you know that?
You mean like at one time? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you have to run like a full marathon to get a marathon medal.
Yes.
You do. So
Yeah, like, in other words, my understanding is the way they're doing the virtual, and I actually read some more about it today. The virtual is you need to do 13.1 in a single, we'll say in a single run or walk, in a single setting, or sitting, no pun intended. And then, and the other scenarios, the 26.2 miles all at one time, meaning one run.
So you wouldn't be able to do 26.2K
Yeah, not the 26.2K would not count as a virtual, and cumulative mileage. I'm not picking on Kelly at all because I'm doing something similar, but 26.2 miles over a 2 or 3 day period would also not count as the virtual. What does count? Sorry.
Don't want anybody to stand and miss out on the medal if they're looking for a medal.
Yeah, what does count would be you can pick your day. You're not required to do the virtual, at least the pig events. You're not required to do the pig events like this weekend. Like, I mean, you could do it today. You could do it next week. I think there's a window of time. I don't know what the expiration of that window is, but it is a window. It's not. It doesn't have to happen May 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, for example. It could be whatever you pick as long as it's before the cutoff. So I know, like, as an example, as a great example, actually, Laura Blackerby is doing her events. She's doing, I think, as we talked about at the beginning here, I asked her the 3-way with cheese. So she's doing, like, she did the 10K yesterday, the 5K today, and then I think her intent is, I think on Saturday she's doing the half marathon. Say it again, Paul. Sorry.
You don't even have to do them all on the same weekend. You can spread them out.
Oh, right, exactly. Right. That's the point. Like, the virtual option allows a little bit more freedom that you otherwise wouldn't have. Obviously, if you were to do it, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, for example, if you're doing like 3-way or 4-way. And again, if you're doing the marathon, I mean, I guess it is kind of odd as this might sound, you could even do the Flying Pig half virtual and the Flying Pig full virtual. Like, you could actually do both races if you wanted to. You just have to do them on different days. Or you don't have to do them on different days, but you probably would be smart to do them on different days. But you could, in theory, I guess you could run them back to back. You would just have to separate them out. So what they're asking for, and it's they even say it on their website, it's like more of a like an honor system setup. But they are asking for people to, like, kind of submit their times or a screenshot of their, watch, or a screenshot of their, Garmin Connect or whatever, just to kind of show that you did it. They're not requiring that you do that. So, if you email them or whatever, and or you had signed up for the virtual race and say, hey, here's what I did, bam, you're in, if that makes sense. So there is the option to just do that as well. But yeah, it doesn't have to be on the same day. It doesn't have to follow this weekend or anything. Any other thoughts, questions? Nay? Good. All right, guys. We greatly appreciate you tuning in, and we appreciate everybody's understanding and sort of adaptation to the changes in the group. Even though the season is ending this weekend, we will absolutely be continuing on throughout what we'll call the off season, and we will have more information to come about what's kind of next and next season and all of that information. But we're not just going to disappear, which is good news. Well, depends on your view, I guess, or your whole perspective. Maybe if you'd like me to disappear, please let me know. Otherwise, we'll certainly be continuing some stuff this spring and into summer. We are to answer Marie's question. Yes, we will have a Zoom call, another one of these on Monday evening for Metal Monday. We will try to get a little creative. Thanks, Kelly. We will try to get a little creative with some things on Monday. And do know, and many people probably already paid attention to this. There are some races that are canceling. I know Carmel, as I'm looking at Mike in the screen here. Carmel, for those who didn't know, the Carmel Marathon, half marathon was finally, for the time being, canceled. I think they're kind of in a holding pattern as to whether or not they'd like to try to reschedule it in the fall. Carmel was supposed to take place in early April, and was postponed till June, and they have officially now canceled that and put that on hold, at least until presumably till the fall, when they might try to take another shot at it. The fall is going to get awfully crowded. I'm guessing they already realize that. And of course, Berlin was canceled last week. And as Marie put in here, as Damon put in here, sorry, Big Sur and San Francisco Marathon have been also postponed. So, you know, a little bit on hold on a couple of things, but you know, we certainly know, you know, for the time being, things are on for the fall. I do also think that there's going to be a bit of a kind of testing period here to see what things look like as some cities and states revert to slightly different patterns than what we've seen in the last 6 weeks. So, you know, we'll continue to monitor things, and obviously we'll keep people informed if we hear anything or learn anything that's not, you know, right out there immediately. We'll certainly let people know. So, again, guys, we greatly appreciate it. We hope that this has been good and fun for you. It's certainly been fun for us to do these. And we look forward to, of course, getting back on the road together as soon as possible. But in the meantime, we wish you a wonderful week, a wonderful pig week, even if it's not the one we know. We'll still celebrate it if you guys are all up for that. I'm certainly up for that. And we will get back together again on Thursday, as I said, for happy hour. Weekend, please get out on the road and do some fun stuff and let us know what you're up to. And then Monday we will pop some champagne, if you will. I probably shouldn't for Metal Monday. and we'll celebrate at least what we have for the season. Yeah, this half functioning wrist that champagne ruined forever. We will at least reconvene and celebrate some good things. So thanks again, guys, for being here. I hope you have a great evening, a great week, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Yeah.